We've got a Black Friday game, Raiders, Chiefs. One of our quarterbacks that we're starting this week is in that game.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes, matchup-based starter. Patrick Mahomes, great last week. We told you to start him. Start him against the Raiders. Their defense has allowed 10 touchdowns and nearly 23 fantasy points per game. The quarterback since week 9. Mahomes is in my top 5. Justin Herbert against Atlanta. Last week, he was good. He wasn't great. But Atlanta has allowed 17-plus fantasy points to quarterbacks 6 times, including 5 who've gone over 20. They've also allowed the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks in the last 4 weeks. So Justin Herbert should give you more in terms of the passing stats this week than he did last week against Baltimore.
Who are we sitting at quarterback?
Tua Tagovailoa has been hotter than a Miami sidewalk in the summertime. Wow. Now he's going to Lambeau Field where he's going to freeze his little tuchus off. And we all know that Tua Tagovailoa does not do well in cold weather games. Go and see what happened to him in the playoffs last year against Kansas City. I am sitting Tua Tagovailoa. I'm also sitting Kirk Cousins this week. His stats have declined in 4 straight games.
Yeah.
Before the bye, he had a 4.9-point stinker against Denver. He's got the Chargers this week. They've allowed 14 touchdowns and 6.2 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season. And, of course, there's no buys this week, so Cousins is easy to sit in a 1 QB league.
Who are we starting at running back?
Chase Brown. He's back after the bye, and he's been one of the hottest running backs in fantasy football, 19-plus points in 3 straight games. His touch share is like 50. I mean, he's just unbelievable right now. He's got the Steelers this week. They've allowed 8 running backs to beat them for more than 16.1 points this season, including 5 who've scored 17-plus against them since week 5. So this is a very good matchup for Chase Brown. And then Lindsay's Bucky Irving, who was a very good play last week. He maybe isn't even a better play this week against Carolina. Their defense has allowed 14-plus points to running backs 10 times, including 6 who've gone over 20. So while Bucky Irving is ranked ahead of Rachaad White this week, they are both startable assets.
Who's not?
I don't love Najee Harris this week. Look at his numbers recently. Since Jalen Warren's come back, he's failed to score more than 13.3 points in 3 straight games. The Bengals have only allowed 1 running back to beat them for more than 14.1 points since week 7. And that includes Derrick Henry and Saquon. So beware Najee Harris and beware James Conner against Minnesota. He's coming off of one of his worst games of the year, 9.9 points against Seattle. Now, he's still pretty good. He's averaging right around 15 points per game, but the Vikings have been tough against running backs. In fact, over the last 4 weeks, no defense in the league has given up fewer yards per rush or fantasy points per game to running backs. So James Conner is a risky flex or low RB2.
Looking at wide receivers now, who are we starting?
Courtland Sutton is on absolute fire, 17 or more points in 4 of his last 5 games. And he has just been phenomenal. And you look at the matchup this week against the Browns, they've given up the 9th most points to perimeter receivers. Their defense has also allowed 16 wide receivers to beat them for 13-plus points, including 8 who've gone over 16. So Sutton's a very good play. That's the Monday night game. And then let's go back to that Steelers-Cincinnati game, George Pickens. Now, last week, one of his worst games since week 6. But, I mean, it was a blizzard in the second half. And let's be honest, if Russell Wilson had hit him in the end zone when he was wide open, we wouldn't be talking about him having a bad game. Now he's got a good matchup against the Bengals. They've allowed 4 touchdowns and the most points per game to perimeter receivers since week 9. And Pickens right now has a receiving EPA of plus 32.7. That's very good. I think this could be a high-scoring game in the jungle.
Who are we not expecting a high-scoring fantasy affair from?
So I just bought a carton of milk and Deebo Samuel was on there because I don't know where the hell he's been, but he has been a shell of himself. 9.2 points in his last 2 games combined. He's failed to score more than 12.6 points in 4 straight games. He's got Buffalo this week. They've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to the perimeter, and they've only allowed 8 touchdowns to wide receivers. And we're not sure what the quarterback situation is in San Francisco, and the weather might be frightful. And then Jaden Reed on Thursday night. I know, I'm going to cry. I love him. But he's been colder than a winter's day in Green Bay. Single digits in all but one of his last 5 games. Miami's defense has been tough on slot receivers. 2 scores and the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game allowed to the inside receivers. So Jaden Reed is a risk in what's going to be one of those icy Lambeau games. All right, dirtbags, let's talk about other ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about PrizePicks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks.
You can turn your hot takes into cash, Fabs. Listen here to figure out which players have the best matchups of the week. We always talk about guys that we like more or less depending on their matchup. Then take that information and flip on over to PrizePicks. See if you think that those players that we talked about will have more or less than the numbers that they have attached to them. It could be number of catches. It could be number of yards. It could be number of touchdowns. You can do it all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick and easy. And if you have a strong take about a guy that you don't have on your fantasy team, this is the place to put that take to work for you. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code FANTASYDIRT and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's like free money, guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Tight ends, who are we starting?
Don't worry about Cade Otton. He had a bad game last week. It happens to the best of us, okay? He's got the Panthers this week. They've allowed the third most points per game to tight ends over the last 4 weeks, and they allowed Noah Gray to score twice against him last week. So don't worry about Cade Otton. Keep him in your lineup. And then Jonnu Smith, yes, again, it's going to be butt cold there in Green Bay. We get it. But he has scored 51.8 combined points. I mean, in his last 2 games, he's on fire. I'm going to continue to start him at what's a thin position. He is at worst a low-end tight end 1. And I don't know that the weather is going to have a big impact on guys who are not throwing the ball downfield. Players in the short and intermediate routes are going to be still pretty solid, and that's where Jonnu lives.
He's sitting at tight end.
Oh, boy, Kyle's been the pits lately. His numbers have really tumbled. 2.1 or fewer points twice while averaging just 4.5 points over his last 3 games. That's terrible. He's also seen just 10 targets in his last 3 games, so he's not getting targeted. He's got the lightning bolts this week. They've allowed 1 touchdown and an average of 11.3 points per game to tight ends as a whole, and only 4 have beaten them for double digits this year. So Kyle Pitts is on the bench. And then Dalton Schultz, don't be tempted by the really good matchup against Jacksonville. If this were any other notable tight end, he'd be a start because the Jaguars have allowed the 7th most points at tight ends. But, I mean, look at Schultz. He's been unable to exploit good matchups all year long. He's averaging 6 points, right around 6 points per game. And this is not a great match. This is not a great week to play him. Even in week 4, when he played the Jaguars, 6.4 points. That's it. Keep him on your bench or on the waiver wire.